Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Maryam Nasir Tafrishi, and I'm the co-chair of APA Division 52, Human Rights, Peace, and Global Wellbeing. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar presentation. And we're having another important topic on a global issue, which is consideration and strategies for supporting the mental health and well-being of third culture kids and adults. I wanted to thank our dear guest speakers, Dr. Patricia Perez and Mr. Brandon Kerr, for accepting our invitation to present today. I would also like to thank the APA Division 52 communication team, our VP, Dr. McGrath, our chair, Dr. Ahmed, and our team members for their support. Before introducing our guest speakers, I would like to ask you to mute your microphones. At the end of the presentation, we will have some time for you to ask your questions. So please enter your questions in the Q&A section, which is located under your Zoom screen. If you are not able to post your questions there, please write a note in the chat box, which is again under your Zoom screen, so our communication team knows and they can help you. And if needed, you can actually then write your questions in the chat box. But if you may first try to write your question in the Q&A section, it's going to be easier for us to find those questions. This presentation will be interactive, and you may type your response to our presenters' questions in the chat box. This webinar will take about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes, including the Q&A section and our closing statements by myself and our chair, Dr. Ahmed. Now it's the time to introduce our dear speakers, starting with Dr. Patricia Perez. Dr. Perez is an adjunct faculty at the Department of Psychology at Adler University. Some of her area of research and practice expertise include mental health and wellness, children and family, international programming and education, career development, life coaching, global mobility and migration, and third culture kids and adults. Dr. Perez is an international psychologist, global consultant, and speaker. Our second speaker is going to be Mr. Brandon Kerr. Mr. Kerr is a lecturer at Kingsborough Community University, part of New York's CUNY system. He has spent the better part of his adult life living abroad, 4 years in South Korea, 4 years in Turkey, and several months in Armenia studying the Russian language. Mr. Kerr is currently completing his PhD degree in international psychology at the Chicago School. Please help me welcome Dr. Patricia Perez, our first guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tafrishi and Dr. Gulzar, for this invitation. I am now going to be sharing my screen, so please let me know if you can see it. Yes?
Yes, we can see it. And it's
Okay.
12:04, so I think by now our guests had time to join us.
Yes, I think there are some guests still coming, but should I go ahead and get started now?
I think we can, yes.
Okay. Sounds good. So Brandon and I are thrilled to be here. Thank you again for this invitation. So before we get started with this presentation and webinar, and hopefully in this webinar, you can think not only about potentially third culture kids and adults, but also and any clients, or you're coming into this space as a parent, as a third culture kid, or an adult, or TCKAs, or you work with this population, or you're just curious. I hope that you think about this webinar and the content that we are going to be presenting from a personal perspective and also from a professional perspective. So that's the ongoing reflection that we hope as we go through these slides and discussion, Brandon and I, that you'll be thinking about. So first and foremost, I want to thank our village here and our professional groups, Dr. Maryam Tafrishi and Dr. Gulzar Ahmad, for this invitation. I also would like to highlight the American Psychological Association Division 52, International Psychology, and the Special Interest Groups, Human Rights, Peace, and Global Wellbeing, in particular, Dr. Breeda McGrath. I would also like to thank, because this would not be possible, for all the TCKAs, or third culture kid and adults, and all of you who are here. So I'd like to pass this on to Brandon, who will be providing the overview.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for being here. Dr. Perez, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. So today's session will cover several key topics. We'll start by defining who TCKAs are, exploring the context they live in, and delving into relevant theories. From there, we'll discuss specific considerations and strategies for supporting their well-being. And lastly, we'll explore applications and next steps you can take to practice or research. So our work stems from the need to better understand the psychological and social emotional challenges that TCKAs face. And by addressing these, we hope to provide strategies that help them to achieve mental well-being despite the complexities of living in multiple cultures. But more specifically, my mother is a TCKA. For me, that is very important. She's a native of Barbados. She came to the United States when she was about 7 years old, if I recall. And in present day, and I can say this because I've talked to her extensively about this, she no longer feels any connection whatsoever with her home country. And that has always fascinated me because growing up, you know, we didn't ask probably as many questions as we should have about our home culture. And now as an adult, I find myself wanting to know more and wanting to know more. And she says, well, you know, it was a little bit different for me. I was kind of an in-betweener. You know, I kind of floated between different places, different cultures, and I never really latched on. And now I feel like I'm latched on. So that sometimes gives her difficulty to talk about it. So that's where my rationale comes from in studying this topic. Dr. Perez, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks so much, Brandon, for your personal account. So I identify, in a minute we'll talk about this, I identify as a third culture kid before and now as an adult. And so this is a personal and professional topic for me. You can see there's some pictures there. We wanted to illustrate some of our, just how this is related and some of our rationale of why we're even doing this presentation, Brandon and I. So my father worked for an oil company. I'm originally from Quezon City, Philippines. That is my root culture. And I moved around. I had about 18 different addresses by the time I was 18 years old. So it was my mother, my mother and I, and a helper. And then there's 4 kids, and I was the eldest of the 4 kids, 3 girls and a boy. So we moved around from the Philippines, then we moved to New York City, then we moved to Houston, Texas, Bartlesville, Oklahoma, London, England, back to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, my senior year of high school. And then I've been in the Chicagoland area now as my home base for the past 37 years. And so the pictures that I have here, which is on the tail end, on the left and on the far left and on the far right of this slide, is my alma mater. My high school alma mater is the American School in London. And so with all of this change, really involuntarily based on my dad's work, and we're going to learn about what a TCKA is, that this was a significant, on a personal note, very significant in my lifespan as far as how I developed as a person. So as an adult, and Dr. Tafreshi, in my bio, I am an international psychologist. And so many of my students know this, that when I learned about international psychology, I said, wow, this is so related. It's very related. Traveling, having a suitcase, moving, navigating, adapting, change, all of those type of things is very much part of my lived experience growing up. Brandon, did you have anything else to add?
No, the pictures at the bottom, those are from times that I've worked in Turkey, as Dr. Tafreshi kindly noted. I've done work in Turkey, I've done work in South Korea, some work in Brazil, essentially looking to explore more about, I guess, the best way to say it, differing cultures, things that are, or rather people that are vastly different than what we experience here in the United States, more specifically here in New York. So I just wanted to share those.
So at this time, and Dr. Tafreshi, can you help me? Because I could literally just see the slides. I'd like to ask the audience where they're coming from, where they're all coming from in terms of being here for this webinar, or their root culture, where they feel like they're either a citizen or they feel like is a shared identity for them. I would love to know that. If anyone could write it in the chat.
Yeah, I have the chat open and waiting. Let's see.
Yeah, so if all of you who were here, if you could write where you're calling in from or joining, or what your root culture is as we move forward. Because I think that would be really helpful for us all here to know that, since this is a global community.
I just want to make sure, just for our community team to know, communication team to know, for example, I don't have access to our guests. So I'm not sure if our guests can type in the chat box. I don't know
Yeah,
if
it's
they're...
saying the chat is disabled, but some are able to post their questions already in the Q&A.
Oh, so the Q&A is where they should post.
Yeah, I think it's showing that it is enabled. It's very strange. It's not showing for participants. So I'll try to
so
look into
they
that.
can use the Q&A. That's great.
Okay, great. Yeah, and let's see. So then in the chat, let's see if anyone. Okay, so you would have access, Dr. Tafreshi, of the Q&A?
Yes.
Okay.
So should I slowly read them, or do you want?
Yeah. If there's anyone, I think we have, a good group.
Okay. And later there are questions.
Okay.
So first of all, one person is asking if the refugees are considered TCK.
Yes. Yeah. So we're gonna go through that in a minute. Yes.
Okay. And then Jean-Michel is saying Afro-Caribbean. I am in the US, but still connected to the Caribbean through work.
Hello, Dr. Ben Dubois.
Yes, thank you for being here.
Yes. Anyone else?
Okay. Dr. Tesorio.
Oh, yes.
Tesorio, is that correct? Tesorio. It says, she said, I can share that I'm from New York City, but I'm Italian. I have an Italian heritage. I am first generation American and can relate to these accounts shared.
Thank you, Dr. Patricia, for joining.
Okay, and Megan Norton is saying, I'm an adult third culture kid. My passport country is the US, but I've lived in 10 countries and 6 US states. Thank you for sharing your professional and personal insight.
Yes. Thanks for joining.
So I'm gonna share mine, tell other guests right now. Yes, I have moved as a kid, to the US, few different states, back home to Iran. I'm originally from Iran. Moved in different 2 cities at least. And then as an adult with my family, we lived internationally from Chile, Brazil, Singapore twice, China, Dubai, and then bases. Yes, we are US citizens. So this relates not only to us as adults, me and my husband, but also to our children. So thank you. Okay, I am from Priscilla Brunsfeld says, I'm from Brazil, moved to US and lived here for 2 years, then moved to Indonesia and now living in Honduras due to my husband's work. Thank you for sharing. Another person, anonymous, I have no children at the American school in London. My daughter was born in New York and my son was born in London. Both my husband and I are American, but the children have grown up in London. They don't feel British and they don't feel American despite having US passports. It is as if they feel that they don't fit in anywhere. These
Yes,
are,
we're going to talk about
so
that.
grateful. Yes, I'm so grateful everybody are sharing, their feedbacks and experience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tafreshi, for helping. And thank you so much for those of you who provided some thoughts. So we're now going to move forward and talk about how we define and some considerations of what this may look like in our generation today. So TCKAs are defined as kids and now adults who have spent predominantly their developmental years really away from their parents' or caregivers' root culture, and also maybe even passport culture. So what does this actually mean? It means that when we think about the developmental years in childhood, it's typically, not everywhere, right? Because it's a different context globally, that this would be before the age of 18 years old, or whatever the age of consent is. So when we say predominantly, that for the majority of that time before 18 years of age, you have spent your time as a child, now as an adult, have spent that time away from your parents' root culture. So then we want to find out what exactly is a third culture, right? What's a third culture? So the first culture is your parents' root culture or passport culture. The second one then is where you've gone. So Dr. Tafreshi mentioned all these places that she's gone and her children and things like that. So then all of those places then would be the second cultures where you were hosted, where you had traveled to. The third culture then, based on Psychology Today, is then that shared experience of whatever that culture is. And for some of us, it is country, it is state, it is during our development. So there could be many third cultures and not just one. But in general, you then creating those shared experiences would be the third culture. So we got the parents or the caregivers is the first. The second then is the host. And the third is that shared experience. I don't know if everybody knows this, but the terminology of third culture kid comes from the pair of Ruth Hill Useem and John Useem, who were American sociologists who really studied the phenomenon of missionaries and what that experience was like starting in the 1950s. And that is where this terminology came from in all their research and discussions on this topic. As you can imagine, as one of our participants said, this was the stereotype where really are expatriates, people who, for some outsiders looking in, leading a very luxurious life, business people, diplomats, government, military, missionaries. That was what was identified as TCKAs. However, we can broaden this definition based on the increased global mobility based on the United Nations 2020, that there are, and I'm sure increasing, there is 272 million individuals and 31, right, and globally, and 31 million people in terms of all around, that this is an increasingly large population, and it's not just for voluntary reasons or people who are in those categories that I mentioned as stereotypes. This also is due to things like migration, world of work, choices, quality of life, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, anyone who involuntarily or voluntarily chooses. Typically, children don't have choices. Some of them do, but that, again, is the definition of TCK, that they really moved and spent most of their time away from that root culture. Some other things to think about in our trending right now, in thinking about third culture kids now and not from the 1950s, is whether or not we can define a root culture based on generational diversity, technology. So for example, when I grew up, I didn't have any technology. So would I consider myself a TCKA based on the fact that I did not have technology, while kids growing up now have technology? So thinking about being a native or an immigrant in terms of technology, and then countries. All right, so here's some other context when we think about TCKAs. As I mentioned earlier, there is stereotypes of our lifestyle. So I remember, I don't know if for those of you who are TCKAs, wondering where people would say to me, Trish, just get over it. You flew first class, you were able to experience the world, travel to 23 countries, vacation, and all these different places. However, just because we have that lifestyle doesn't absolve us from mental health and well-being issues. For some in countries, or based on your cultural context or social context, mental health is considered a taboo, or maybe not well understood. And so that also becomes a barrier to really looking at mental health issues. And for some, it's considered a luxury. As I mentioned to you before in the previous slide, this is an increasing population. in the flyer, thank you so much, APA Division 52 for the lovely flyer, that we are citizens of everywhere and nowhere. And so sometimes we don't, just like one of the attendees said, sometimes we don't feel like we really fit in everything. Across the lifespan, there is grief and loss. You can only imagine this. As we move, as a child, especially, we're moving back and forth and we don't know what's going on sometimes. And maybe family members are just so, and parents and caregivers are so focused on the logistics of those moves that we are not spending time addressing the adaptability and that grief and loss. Much of the topic that we're going to be, or much of the direction that we're going to be talking about in terms of addressing some of these mental health concerns is understanding the sense of home and belonging and impact in terms of TCKAs. Also, as you can imagine, this has impact in relationships in childhood, with people, place, and things, and also through adulthood. This is a developmental and lifelong issue. And I would also like to anchor this, because it is Division 52, that we uphold the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them, if you are not familiar with it. In particular, number 3, which is good health and well-being. I'm going to pass this on now to Brandon, we're going to stop and reflect for a minute. So hopefully you can all join us here.
Yes, thank you. So, as she said, let's take a moment to reflect on this powerful quote by Maya Angelou. The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned. So this idea, it resonates deeply with TCKs because as their notion of home is not singular, it's also not static. Many of them experience what we can describe as a homesickness without a home, an ongoing search for belonging that can feel insatiable and endless. It just goes on and on and on. And TCKAs, they often grow up feeling that they don't fully belong anywhere. They have roots in different places, and yet none of those places fully feel like home. The sense of restlessness, of always looking for a safe place to be is a common emotional thread amongst them, and it runs through their experiences. And we can think about the emotional consequences that manifest in chronic feelings of displacement or even identity confusion. And reflecting on this, how do we as practitioners, as educators, as peers, help TCKs as we define home for not only them, but for ourselves, right? How do we create spaces where they can feel accepted no matter how many cultures they embody? And this search for home, it's not just physical, it's emotional, it's mental, and it's spiritual, and it's crucial for their well-being. From a psychological perspective, when we think about this ache for a home, it can influence their attachment styles, social relationships, and even career choices. So TCKs, they may gravitate towards professions or lifestyles that allow them to continue moving around. And conversely, they may start to seek out stability in one place for years instead of constant movement, or rather they prefer constant movement. When we think about home, belonging, and impact, building on Maya Angelou's reflection, we want to think about what that truly means. Those words, home and belonging. These concepts, they're deeply tied to their identity and mental health. For most people, home is a physical place, but for TCKAs rather, home can be more abstract. So I want us to think about what, where, and when home is for us. When you think about where this place is versus truly belonging, we often receive this complex layered answers. Home might be a city where they spent their childhood, or it could be memories of a particular time in your life. We want to hear from you. What does that mean for you, this home? And secondly, when we think about belonging, what, where, and when is belonging to you? Those places can be all around the world. For some of us, we might be in the home that we grew up in, but it doesn't truly feel like home. For some of us, home feels like it's always moving. It's always switching places. So if you'd like, please, you can throw inside the chat a couple of your thoughts on this. What do you think of when you think of home, and what do you think of when you think of belonging? I'll give you guys a couple moments. Dr. Perez, while they answer that, did you want to add something here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon. Yeah, I just wanted to add here also on this slide, while we're thinking about these two questions, which are really, if you don't have the answer to it, it's something just to continue reflecting on. And thinking about this as in whatever role you're in coming into this presentation, that these are really two big questions that could be asked, anchoring a little bit now to fields, right? For those of you who are psychologists or mental health professionals or educators, that the one thing that we can anchor this on, we'll talk about relative theories in a minute, is social psychology and our engagement with interaction with people, places, and things. And so as Brandon was mentioning, sometimes home to us is not just a place. In addition, this really feeds into the lifespan of social emotional development. So I just defined social development, which is interaction with people, place, and things. But emotional development then is really understanding and expressing our emotions. So that's all I really wanted to add. But yeah, I would be very curious, Dr. Tafreshi. I apologize because you're really handling all of but if you can just pick out a couple thoughts here, if for those of you, or you could privately think about this. Yes, we would love to hear.
I'm waiting for the guests to write in the Q&A, because again, the chat box is not working. And then for us, the Q&A doesn't work. So I was writing mine in the Q&A. Okay, one is here from Dr. Patricia. For me, home is where I feel welcome and safe. It may not be a physical space per se, rather a place where I can be vulnerable while accepted. Thank you. And I just wrote mine till, we wait another person includes. For me, it's a place of mutual understanding and inclusion, rather than always being expected to understand others from a different culture and always us embracing them. So,
yeah, there's no right or wrong here. I mean, there's no right or wrong in these answers, right? It's really, I mean, we'll talk about this. We're going to frame it more in international psychology and development. But right now, it's really for you to start thinking about and maybe even putting yourself in the shoes of a TCKA if you're not that person, right? If you never grew up predominantly in your younger years, or, if you're a parent, right? Because that's a totally different situation. So yes, these are great comments.
So we have more comments. So
good.
Jenny Benjamin, to me, my home is where my family is, and belonging is anywhere where I feel like I can be myself and feel safe doing so.
Yes.
We have Megan Norton. As a TCS kid, I consider the countries I've lived in my heart homes, and that I'm homeful. So let me read this again. As a TCK, I consider the countries I lived in my heart homes, and that I'm homeful. Belonging is an ever-changing engagement and response. Instead of believing I don't belong anywhere, I reframe it as I belong to multiple places and people. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. I always say that I'm a global citizen. So my home is the world, right? And when I feel like I belong, it's people. It's not a place. For me, it's people that I have relationships with. And then that makes me feel like, because I belong, there's a sense of that safety and security in that I can be who I am. Therefore, then I feel like it's home. So it could be here in the Chicagoland area because my family's actually here. But as many people here at this webinar who know me, when I travel to all of these places for work and global projects, that the home then is really the people, and then I call it the home. I don't know if any of that makes sense.
It does.
Thank you.
Dr. Perez, I have a quick question for you. I'm pondering what Dr. Tesoriero mentioned about feeling welcomed. What are your thoughts on the differences between having a sense of belonging versus feeling welcomed, like as if that people want you to be there?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, I'll just say a very short answer because we're gonna need to move on. But the short answer is, when I feel like belong, I'm invited to the space. You know, sometimes, and all the international psychologists will know this when I've taught you, where just because you're invited to the space doesn't mean you belong to that group. So ideas of belonging then, right? So you could be invited, right? So maybe you belong. That's an outsider, insider looking in, but then home, right? Which is, I would say, more like people are including you, is when people have said in other cultures or contexts, really, it does, right? Other contexts, cultures, or as a TCKA, or even as an international psychologist, when people say you are now one of us. When they say that, and I get that frequently, you are now one of us, that for some reason I have acculturated, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, I have acculturated to their values, all the things that make them British, make them part of the technology era, make them whatever, that now that you are now part of our home. So there's different perspectives and thinking on either side, right? But I'm coming from when people, because that's arrogant for me to think. It's arrogant for me to think that someone is welcoming me to their home when in actuality I haven't proven myself yet that way.
Also fair. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move forward to looking at relevant theories and frameworks, and you can imagine these three that we're going to be identifying are huge. Okay, so this is a very much of an overview. So
now, can you still see the slides real quick? I'm not seeing the slides anymore. Are they still shared?
Yes, they are shared. They are
yeah,
shared.
I can see the slides. Okay, Dr. Tafreshi, you can see it. Okay. All right, so let's start with attachment theory, and I'm just going to go very quickly across all of these, and really hoping to get to some cases. But in terms of attachment theory, this is the work of John Bowlby and then Mary Ainsworth, who actually came up with the categories of a secure and insecure attachment based on our strange situation. If you do not know what attachment theory is, this is the idea or a theory or framework that posits that early caregivers established social emotional foundations. However, we can change our attachment and bonding to other people across the lifespan that has implications to all of our interpersonal relationships. Okay, so as a child, we expect to survive in this world to be with caregivers who are predictable, who are consistent, who are safe, and provide security to us as a framework and a pattern for us then to move forward to survive in this world. Then we move forward to adult attachments. In terms of the second framework, we're looking at acculturation psychology, which was spearheaded by Dr. Berry and also by a student, Dr. David Sam. So acculturation psychology then, in a very summary viewpoint, is a process of cultural and psychological changes that occur when people from different countries or contexts come into contact with each other. And this can happen in different levels. It can happen on an individual level, because this could happen on a group level, all these changes, right? This could also happen through time, which is developmental. We have coping strategies based on acculturation psychology. When we look at our root culture or passport culture to our host cultures, where we can reject our root and passport, we can adopt the host and reject. We can have a combination as we cope and show behavior. And last but not least, we can create our own. We can create our own process of change. So in acculturation psychology, it can be unidimensional, it can be bidimensional, and it can also be multidimensional. Then last but not least, because I'm biased and I graduated from a master's program called the Erickson Institute, this is then looking at Erik Erikson's psychosocial 8 stages of development. So as a TCKA, the traditional format or the way that we look at this is that we go through all of these 8 stages across the lifespan. But as a TCKA, as you can imagine, because we have circled around in that adaptation and change in many cultures, we can circle back. It's very cyclical for us, where we can start in mistrust versus trust and just continue moving forward and cycling around through those stages. All right, so we're now going to move on to some considerations, and then following that, we're going to be looking at supports and strategies, and then Brandon is going to move us forward with us thinking about some cases. So some of the things when you work with this population you might want to think about is the age of the move prior to 18 years of age and all of those third cultures that might happen. The other thing we need to think about is the frequency and duration in the host culture and what that means to the child. As you can imagine, if you're a developmentalist, there are certain markers based on societal and cultural norms of what those developmental milestones need to look at. Also, to the nature of the move, why they're moving, right? So if you're an asylum seeker, refugee, migrant, that particular population might look very different than, for example, if you're a child of a diplomat and what that looks like. Are there support systems, or is that valued in the cultural context to provide support for the mental health and well-being in a school, in a family system, in the community, wherever the child lands? And last but not least, I think I've talked about this, that we are anchoring a lot of our discussion here in development and milestones. So this is very general. And again, there's not a lot of time, but hopefully there will be some questions or some comments in terms of the cases. But when we think about general supports and strategies, the way that we're looking at goal setting is really anchoring things in terms of the home, belonging, and also recognizing that there is impact in children and then adults moving forward, that home and belonging, it may not be a place. It could be a thing. It could be people. The other thing is that we are trying to create and sustaining over time memories and mindful and meaningful relationships. What I found in my work with this topic is that there is not enough creation of ongoing emotional space for TCKAs to gather together. I'm actually part of my own Facebook, the American School in London space, but we don't talk about this in terms of emotions and how we feel about our journeys as TCKAs now. All right, the other thing too is the question of, do we plant roots? Is that okay? And how do we share our particular lived experience, which is very different from other people who, for example, just travel as adults. We're very different because of our shared history. The other thing too is that this could also go into the workplace where employees need to train and have some sort of consultation and counseling, really at schools, right? So for those administrators who are working in international schools, for the parents, PTOs, for the educators who are in this space, to be very mindful of their audience and for the children. I've already talked about the stereotypes and the lifestyles, and as you can imagine, every person who is a TCKA has similarities and differences over time. So this is just a quick overview of what this might look like in terms of the developmental period across the lifespan and some particular strategies that we could use for children and adults for TCKA. So for example, in the 0 to 3, these children learn from, if they're moving around with their families in whatever capacity, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, that these kids, these young children learn through their senses. So having a transitional object, right? We're moving them towards that home and belonging, pictures, so that they are sustaining a secure attachment when this is formed. In early childhood, we are building upon what the 0 to 3 population has with, again, some technology, maybe some goodbye rituals, and they could do some letter writing or texting. Middle childhood, their need for initiation is that you could start including them in initiating what these hellos and goodbyes could look like. In the teen years, they're transitioning from child to an adult, collaboration on what that home and belonging looks like. Young adulthood and middle adulthood, late adulthood, there is adult attachment in those patterns. Middle to late adulthood, we're ending with senses again, but creating of memories and reunions, because as we get older, some of those memories and reunion really then are part of who we are. Okay, I know that went very quickly, but we would like to get to this point. I'm going to stop here. I guess if anyone just has any very quick comments before we just go through very quickly some of these case examples, and we're gonna, well, at the end, if you want if you want these slides, our contact information will be at the end. So Dr. Tafreshi, if there's any very quick comments about all that I went through, that was very fast.
Okay, there is one question that I think probably later you're going to be answering or answering. It's like, what would be practical tool for parents to support their TCKs? And
I think I said some of these right here, right? And so if there is a need to talk more about this and how that actually happens, then please reach out. Please reach out to us. But these would be some of the strategies, right? From a developmental standpoint.
I actually, Dr. Perez, have a question. You know, the prior slide you had.
Okay.
You know, this is a wonderful slide that you're putting about the needs and strategies, but can you expand a little bit more what it means? For example, the young adulthood, adult attachment. Can you expand a little bit and bring some examples, you know, for a few of them? Maybe starting from adolescence going down.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing with the case studies. But yes, I could definitely answer in general about this. So based on some of the theories that we went through, so Erik Erikson, the developmental stage is intimacy versus isolation for young adulthood. Okay, which I think some of my students are there. This morning I taught this particular lesson, young adulthood. And so again, we learned about attachment, right? Based on attachment theory, a lot of that is set in the 0 to 3 years. So now, right, because of all of the moves and things like that, TCKA's ideas now as an adult, right? We are now adults, TCAs. How are they going to reconcile or try to understand, for example, all of those moves when they start building intimacy with friends, significant partners, what that looks like? Because then the crisis is that you're alone. And many young adults, I mean, I remember talking to some of my peers who have lived this type of life, where many of them say, you know what, Trish, I remember when I was a teenager or in middle childhood, you know, in middle school, where I didn't even bother making friends because I knew I was going to move in a year. So by the time they're a young adult, some of them run away from intimate partnerships. Some of them have insecure attachments. They run away. They're avoidant, right? And so how, as parents, as educators, how do we create then that secure base? And so all of that is a whole nother conversation. Does that help you, Dr. Tafreshi?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So we don't have a lot of time. I don't know, Dr. Tafreshi, how much time we have, but at this point, but we have 3 cases, right? And Brandon is going to be walking us through this.
So in the interest of time, for those who do want to read ahead and start to prepare their thoughts for the chat, we're going to be asking you about your personal professional thoughts and feelings about these case studies, and then we'll be able to discuss some considerations we want to make. So for the first one, we have a kid, 6-year-old child, Sally, who moved 3 months ago from the United States to the United Arab Emirates, just started at an international baccalaureate school. This is the first move of the family, and Sari is the eldest of 4 children. All family members are U.S. citizens. Sally started wetting her bed and is needing to sleep with her parents. What are our thoughts on this? Is it a spoiler for us to give our thoughts on this first? It's probably a spoiler, right?
Yeah, let's see what anyone else has to say as we move on to another developmental period.
Do you want the guests to think about it only, or do you want them to write in the Q&A chat?
They can write. They can actually write.
Yeah, they can write what their thoughts are. Again, there's no right or wrong here, but you know, I think our job, Brandon and ours job, is to frame it based on some of the things that we talked about so far in this webinar, and also the theoretical frameworks, and really coming from psychology and international psychology. That's really how we're anchoring a lot of this stuff. Because in the conversations of TCKAs, right, we're not necessarily assuming that when people write about TCKAs or have thoughts on TCKAs, much of that is from their own either viewpoint as a TCKA, but maybe not in terms of attachment theory, Erik Erikson, human development, right? And acculturation psychology. So that's what we sort of bring to the table in a global space. All of that, right, is maybe very different than however other people who are part of this community.
So Dr. Ahmed wrote Regression, Insecure Feelings, and a New Culture.
Right. Yeah. So it's not atypical for young children, right? Or any child really to regress. And like wetting her bed from a developmental point of view, potty training and things like that usually happen around 3, barring any, enuresis and things like that. So wetting the bed is typical, but you're wondering, right? And many kids at this age, when there's a new move, they don't understand. And even if they do understand, they might have regressive behavior, right? They might start sucking their thumb, they're wetting their bed, they want comfort from their parents. And so this is a huge transition, right? And sometimes they don't have the language to explain things, and you see behavioral, right? You see behavioral things that are happening. Yes,
Yeah.
Perfect.
We have a
So,
comment
yeah.
from, I'm sorry, Dr. Freshy,
Yes.
go ahead.
So in the Q&A, Megan is saying developmentally, it sounds like Sally may be in a prolonged state of stress, complex PTSD.
Yeah, so I wouldn't go so far as that, because they would have to be seen by a licensed clinical, professional or whatever. And we also have to think about the context of whether or not there's training in the host country and all of that, right? So, but yeah, I mean, if it's not addressed, it could be something that becomes traumatic, right? If the parents reject, no, you can't sleep in the bed, no, we don't recognize, or the child is punished because they're wetting their bed, but from an educator or parent's point of view, they do need to recognize, especially too, this is a first move, or whether it's not a first move, that this is something that's a change, right? And supporting that change is really, really important, and saying it's okay to the child. But yes, Megan, if it just continues, then it could be, but at this point in time, we're not diagnosing.
But we could definitely say that she has emotional distress.
Yes,
There's
right,
emotional
yeah.
distress that we, in this particular case, would say from the first international move, it disrupts her stability, her routine. And these are
it's a disruption.
anxiety-based behaviors. Yeah. The
Right, because
bedwetting.
most kids and people like routine. We like to be in control. We like to know that things are happening. And TCKAs, I remember, like, I don't really, I mean, I've gone through my own process and journey, but dinner time was a time when my dad would announce to the entire family, all right, everyone, we're moving in 3 months to Bartlesville, Oklahoma. All right, everyone, we're moving to London, England. Okay, everyone, so that was already primed in my brain, right? And so sometimes those type of things happen too. So, all right, we're going to move on to this one now.
We have one more, Dr. Sarvin Sobit Qadam, and thank you for being here. This transition seems being stressful and appears to not be able to have consolidate with the new environment, and the parents appears to be the only sense of security.
Yeah, so I mean, I think over time, thank you, Sarvin, for being here. I think over time, there might be, this is sort of the starting point, but I think the reason why we developed this case is that to demonstrate that there are regressive behavior. And if you can't situate it and understand, this could be because of the transition, loss, saying goodbye to friends and family, that it needs to be addressed, and hopefully it's also addressed in school. Okay, we're now moving on to another developmental period.
Let's see, we got a teen here. A 16-year-old teen, Mark, was born to an Indonesian mother and Filipino father. They have been living for the past 5 years in Houston, Texas, it's in the United States, as the father works for an oil company. This is their 3rd international move. Although doing well in school, Mark has no friends, and when asked by teachers and parents why this is the case, he says they are going to leave me anyway, so why bother? What are our thoughts?
Gonna wait for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tafreshi, for being our eyes and ears.
You're welcome. You're welcome. This is very interesting, both your presentation and the interactive part of it. And hearing what our guests have to say.
Yeah, and I apologize. This is such an overview. There's just so much more to say. So we're trying to capture the big pictures, you know.
And again, it's okay because we haven't separated Q&A from, you know, it's interactive mode. So this is wonderful.
Okay.
I don't see anybody writing here. I'm assuming, you know, just one thing is exhaustion of loss and grief.
Yeah, doing it over and over and over and over again, right? Yes.
And not wanting to experience that grief again, so it's like better to avoid it. And okay, Dr. Gulzar Ahmad is saying feeling of rootlessness.
Yes, right. And so you put all this energy, right? So if you're 16 years old, you're working through things like identity versus role confusion. Again, Erik Erikson. You're also maybe dealing with intimacy, although that's, you know, traditionally somewhere else, but you're trying to find your way as you move forward to becoming an adult. That teen years is very much child to an adult, right? And so if we're thinking about attachment theory, like if you just keep on moving all the time, it's like, what's the point? What's your secure base? What is all of these stuff? And it's like, yes, that's right. Like the sense of hopelessness, like, okay, so what is going to change in this third move? So if I have a friend, am I going to see this friend another time? Am I going to sustain that friendship? I'm not going to see them in person, right? So in this generation, we can't sustain things because we have social media, we have we have WhatsApp, we have Viber, we have all these type of things, but you can only imagine in past generations, right? Generational diversity in past generations, when we're gone, we're gone. And maybe we could write letters, like mail letters, send photographs, like take actual pictures and send, but that's about it.
So, okay, now we have 4 more replies here. So Dr. Sabet Qalam is saying avoidance attachment as he has sense of loss of his relationship during his last move. So he is protecting his emotions. And then Bodla is saying, really appreciate wonderful presentation. What are the main psychological causes of wedding in children? Okay, I'm sorry, that was a question maybe we can get to later. Okay, so Megan Norton is saying, this is a typical story, part of my story too. It can be helpful for the parent to comfort, acknowledge the grief instead of moving into encouragement quickly. This is where technology can be a useful tool to stay in touch. And then Jenny Benjamin is saying, Mark is experiencing a form of emotional self-protection by avoiding relationships. And one more. Let me see. Dr. Gulzar is saying alienation, lack of intimacy, loneliness.
Yes, and so we don't want to get that to Dr. Gulzar's point. We don't want to get to that point because then that affects all of the other developmental milestones. But yes, so based on social psychology, we are social beings. We, as I said that to you before, we want to belong. And so how do we do this in our rootlessness, feeling like we're citizens of everywhere but nowhere? But how do we have a sense of not feeling anxious that we don't have a base in this just constant moving around all the time? How do we have a sense of that home and belonging? So yes, it's again a little bit more complicated and obviously very unique for the individual. All right, so this is our
I love the point on emotional self-protection.
Oh yeah.
You know, this is a kid, and to say something like they're going to leave me anyway at that age is wild. It's wild.
Well, other people say that. You don't have to be a TCKA, but you know, I mean, this is, we're just sort of framing it this way. But yeah, so this is our last case now.
All righty. We have an adult now, 30-year-old Amira has been stressed because her parents continue to nag her about getting married and that she's reportedly now too old. During her childhood, she moved to 3 different countries and had 10 different home addresses. She told her parents as a teenager that she does not want to get married, ever. What are our thoughts?
And these are real clients, by the way. So.
And thank you for sharing those with us.
Yeah, the names have changed.
I was just about to add that.
The names have changed, yeah. Some things have changed.
We're going to give some time.
Mhm.
So would you like to answer this question while we wait for our guests to reply to
Sure.
this?
Brandon, you wanna
Yeah.
say some have some
About, it
thoughts on
was
this?
about, oh, okay.
I would say that Amira's case is highlighting perhaps the tension between the cultural expectations and the personal desires that she has. There's that constant push and pull. And I think that her parents' traditional values of marriage, they're in conflict with her own values. I mean, that without more context, that would be my first thing. And I think it's shaped by her cross-cultural upbringing. I think
Yeah, so that's really
but
key. So I'm going to go into international psychology doctoral level courses mode now. So the way that I see this, I mean, one point to bring up is the fact that if she has been moving to all of these different countries and contexts, right, and different addresses, and we don't know what these countries are, when we think about Hofstede's cultural dimensions and individualism versus collectivism, where I'm thinking maybe, you know, she is over time as a child adopting or understanding how she is in her sense of identity in cultures and countries that are individualistic. We believe in me, my, and mine, or collectivistic, which we function on a we. The dilemma, like you were saying, Brandon, the dilemma of making a choice for herself, which may not be a choice for her alone, especially if she comes from a collectivistic culture.
we want to think about how important it is to validate her feelings while also thinking about how her diverse cultural background might have influenced that and the relationship with her parents. So,
yeah, and in some countries are right in that cross-cultural communication, feelings is not a thing. Mental health is not a thing. It's action. Like you need to get married to bring honor to our family. That's about it. But who cares about what you feel?
Okay, so Dr. Sabet Qadam is saying lack of sense of belonging due to frequent moves. The client struggles to build intimate relationship and maintain it. As she moved around, the sense of belonging hasn't been developed appropriately, which impacting developing intimate relationships.
Right. I mean, we could probably wager to say, right, insecure attachment, whether it is avoidant, anxious, or disorganized, or all of the above, of why she doesn't want to get married. This is also a generational diversity issue because in this generation, as opposed to other generations developmentally, the end goal of getting married is not a thing, right? Depending on where you are in the world.
And Dr. Ahmed is saying too much mobility has made her feeling of loss and loss with resentment. And as as we are hearing, all these perspective about why this is happening, I think this is actually great realization of this, that is, we should kind of open up maybe in other cases that the reasoning it can be multiple things and not assuming because the first thing that comes to mind, that is the reason, and we become judgmental.
Right, and it also could not be because she's a TCKA, but because of her experiences, right? Because of the changing environments as a TCKA, right? And I mean, you don't even have to leave your hometown to feel some of these type of things, right? Because of individual differences. But in this case, right, a lot of that could add another whole individual level of acculturation to whatever, as she grows her own sense of self and identity as an adult. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So we know time is short, but we're moving forward, right, Brandon?
Yes, we have our references here. If I believe this is recorded, so if anybody did want the recording, you'd be able to reach out for that. Also, if you did want a copy of the slides, we do have PDF copies that are available. On the next slide, we have our email addresses here. Feel free to reach out to either of us, and we'll make sure that you get that information. Thank you guys so much
Yeah, thank
for being
you.
here with us.
Thank you so much.
Are we asking any more questions? Are we leaving a
Yes,
I think we're
Q&A?
gonna open
it's
it up.
okay. We can have 5 or 10 more minutes. We have
Mhm.
one question that was written way before. Modla is saying, really appreciated, wonderful presentation. What are the main psychological causes of wedding in children?
Okay, so I think I mentioned some of these things right already in terms of psychological or developmental causes. I think transition. Okay, so transition, any sort of transition that the child, a young child in early childhood, anywhere from 3 to 6, based on that case, that they don't understand what's going on. It's also a sense of control when you don't have control, right? So wetting the bed is like literally not a sense of control, right? When you are able to hold, right, your urine, bowel movements and things like that, that is a sense of control, right? When you don't have that, so that signals psychologically to any adult that there is something going on. So there's a developmental aspect, there's a social emotional aspect, there's a language aspect where they can't actually tell you what's going on, unconsciously, subconsciously, what's going on. So all of those really developmental things lead into the psychology, right, of what then moves on of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So I think there's more to that. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the underpinning of why a child, right, some of those psychological underpinnings of why that could be, because there needs to be sense of routine, control, autonomy, all of those type of things need to be there, or else children don't feel like they have any control over things.
And probably Dr. Perez, please correct me on this, maybe adding the parents saying what is the need. For example, in this case, the child wanted to sleep with the parents. So
Yeah.
do you agree with that? If they need that for that time
that's a
anxious?
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, because depending where you are in the world, we have a family bed, regardless of your socioeconomic status, we have a family bed, or based on socioeconomic status, there's no other choice, but everyone's sleeping together, right? Everyone's sleeping together in a tent, in a space, whatever, it doesn't really matter. However, the point here is that your child, the point of that case is your child is demonstrating a different behavioral issue that didn't happen before, but maybe as a result of this transition, it happened. So the parents need to be attuned to that. And we can make exceptions, but you need to language it to the child to say, you know what, I recognize, and model it. I recognize that you need to be close to us right now. I'm wondering if you miss your friends. And potentially say, you know, because talk to me about that. If they say, this is really hard for me, mommy, this is what's going on. And if this was my child, and I've done this before, I make an exception because the need is greater than following development. Does that make sense, Dr. Freshi?
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, we have, okay, so Sarveen is saying, thank you all. Kendra Hill, thank you, great information. Anonymous attendee, as a teacher and advisor at the American School in London, what are ways we as educators who may have our own TCKA experiences be able to support our students and offer space for them to process their own TCK experience?
Yeah, I would love to come to my alma mater and do something there. But what I've done in other international schools is I've created spaces for parents and educators to be able to talk about their own lived experiences. So not only do they have a space for you to hold and be able to discuss that and get validation and reassurance, sometimes too in that space, you can also share with the children, right? You could also share with the children and the school population that you also are a TCKA, and that whether or not these kids at any developmental level can relate to you. And sometimes that really helps, because sometimes they see educators and leaderships at these international schools as like here, and you don't empathize with their experience. For them to hear your stories, for you to create spaces. So like in places that I've gone to create these spaces, sometimes like once a month, right? Or by grade level, or by school, like the lower school, middle school, high school, all of those type of things, then gives that attention. And in the talking and sharing of stories, that actually helps that helps on all levels. So thank you so much for coming.
I would only add that in understanding that in different cultures, there might be different approaches to how you're talking to students and what topics you talk to them about. You could then put that in with arts, with music, giving them opportunities to express it so that we don't have to overtly ask them about their experiences or just come and say we're TCKs, that we can find out more about them and maybe offer up our own experiences through that art, through that music, through those other conduits, so that they might feel comfortable approaching us as educators as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. Like expressive arts, or even like when you welcome a family, right? Well, when you welcome a family, many packets for that expatriate or whoever have etiquette, culture, and whatever, and they don't necessarily talk about mental health stuff. They say, okay, this is what you need to do when you're in the UK. This is what you need to do when you're in Indonesia. This is what you need to do when you're in Kuwait. But they don't talk about fully what that means for everyone, the system, the educational atmosphere, the child in the system. All of that then can be expressed instead of a whole bunch of handouts and websites. There could be some sort of orientation that really allows the family and the child to reflect in whatever modality of expression. I mean, that would be great, whether it's verbal, whether it's nonverbal, right? Arts, things like that. So that at least they feel some sense of ownership.
Thank you. Dr. Patricia is mentioning, no question, just wanted to commend Dr. Trish and Brandon for a wonderful and an engaging presentation. This is a critically important topic, especially as we live in an ever-evolving and mobile environment. Truly great work. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Megan Norton saying, thank you for leading this presentation, increasing understanding and awareness of TCKs and their challenges. Celebrations is important. The TCK care industry is growing cross sector with several organizations doing training and workshops for parents, educators, and TCKs themselves. I appreciate the growing public voice of TCKs and resources. I wrote a book about my experience called Belonging Beyond Borders, How Adult Third Culture Kids Can Cultivate Sense of Belonging as an advocate for this group. Sarvin,
thank you.
Very good point. The anonymous attendee, thank you. So you're having a lot of thank yous, amazing presentations. The anonymous presenter is saying, guest is saying, please come to us at ASL. And
Yay!
Jenny Benjamin, thank you for this informative and engaging presentation. I learned a lot. Thank you so much. You know, this is again, a very important global issue, the well-being of TCKs and adults. And I very much appreciate you sharing your perspectives from a psychology, but also from an international psychology perspective. Dr. Ahmed, do you have any?
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank and congratulate Dr. Perez and Dr. Kerr for their nice presentation. And what I feel is that this is a bit new topic, I think, for discussion and research as well. I'm really impressed by this presentation as well, because it has given many thoughts to all the audience. Regarding this issue, which is very much pertinent and is prevailing in this age of globalization. And we people are moving from place to place because of various reasons. And this process will go on and on for a long time, I think so. But these people, the children and adults, are being ignored, and I feel in my personal observations as well, many of them feel cultural shocks, cultural traumas, cultural gaps, and difficulties in adjustment in their life while moving around different cultures and countries or place to place. So the point is, again, there are some other points that I think need to be addressed or maybe included in future researches. For example, xenophobia is a very important thing that now is prevailing in the minds of the settlers and the residents. And number two is just like prevailing Islamophobia or xenophobia even. These are also the points that need to be considered. And how we can address all these issues is again a very important point. And next is that, for example, as we see the microaggression against the immigrants, why is it like that? So the experiences and the observations that kids and the adults have in the new cultures while they're settling in different places. So this needs to be addressed as well. So there are many benefits as in this topic. I think the culture, this shock, mobility, people become more motivated, more proactive for adjustment. Uh, they are more culturally intelligent. They know how to adapt, and they are sometimes they feel more motivated and move forward in life. As we see sometimes, even the American president was also, I think, belonging to this TCK, isn't it? Barack Obama, for example. Even the UK president, last president, who belonged to India, and sometimes there are many other stories like that. So the point is that though this has cultural benefits, and at the same time there are many challenges as well. So we need to address all these challenges that they're facing, what the difficulties they come across, and this is a good area for research. At the same time, I think that as authors have mentioned, that there's a great need for guidance and counseling for these sort of cultural kids. And teachers and parents should be well aware of all these things. Even social psychologists and social workers, even the policymakers, the government should be well known that what the difficulties they might be facing and how to tackle all those problems and issues around about these people. It's very interesting and very useful topic. I think I congratulate you all again, and I think that we should think, and sometimes I think that I should give some topics to my students as well for research to explore this area further. Nice, well done. Congratulations. Best wishes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Perez. Thank you, Brandon. And thank you to all our guests for joining us today and for your meaningful participation. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.